Tonight's lecture is regarding our mother Leah. Out of all of the mothers of Israel, she is the most enigmatic, most mysterious, the most ambiguous. And we see throughout the works of the Medrash, and later even in Zohar, we see all different views of her. In fact, the same acts which the Torah records regarding Leah are interpreted by some negatively and are interpreted by others positively. And in general, therefore, we have a view of Leah that is slightly beclouded. Not as clear as Sarah and Rivka, certainly not as clear as Rachel. The basic story of Leah, as we all know, is that Yaakov in the Torah loves Rachel, and in one sentence in the Torah, it says that he dislikes Leah. It says, Vayar Hashem ki snua Leah. God saw that Leah somehow is not liked by her husband. The background to that is the story that we all know, famous Medrash, Rashi quotes it, is that Lavan switched women on him on the wedding night. Yaakov's agreement was to work 7 years, and then he would be given he would given Rachel as his bride. He worked the 7 years, and on the wedding night, Lavan switched it on Yaakov, and Vahi baboker v'nei Leah. In the morning, he got up and it was Leah. And Rashi quotes again the Medrash. How could that have occurred? The Gemara says that Yaakov is well aware that Lavan is not to be trusted, and therefore he, of his own volition, made up certain codes, certain secrets with Rachel, so that he would be able to recognize her and know her at the time that they lived together. And that when Rachel became aware that her father was going to switch and put Leah into Yaakov, so then she did not want to shame her sister, embarrass her sister, so she revealed to her the codes. And therefore Leah was able to pass herself off as Rachel, except in the morning, Vahi baboker v'nei Leah. Very difficult story from any viewpoint. Certainly not the way to begin a marriage. And therefore there is this underlying tension between them, their entire married life. The Medrash says that Leah was as beautiful as Rachel. Here we have again, in the Torah it says, Ve'enei Leah rakos. The eyes of Leah rakos. So rakos can mean they were weak. She did not necessarily have strong, beautiful eyes. Rakos can also mean soft and attractive. And we find again there are two interpretations. The famous interpretation that all of us know, again based on Rashi, is that in the house of Lavan, they sensed that Yitzchak's twins would marry Lavan's daughters. And since Leah was the older one and Esau was the older son, so she felt that she was going to be destined to marry Esau. And because of the fact that Esau's reputation was so negative, that Esau was a murderer and a thief and a womanizer, so she wept all the time. How will I be given over to such a person? And from that, Rashi says that her eyelids and her eyelashes were affected, and her eyes did not look attractive. However, the other point, the other commentary says that her eyes were beautiful, and that she was equal in beauty to her sister Rachel. And that the comment, Eine Leo Rakos, is not meant to be a negative statement about her, but it's a compliment. She had outstandingly beautiful eyes. And therefore, the Torah tells us that Yaakov should have been attracted to her because of the fact that she was so physically appealing. So we have right at the beginning this duality of opinion regarding how we treat Leah. She's beautiful, she's not beautiful. The Medrash also tells us that both Rachel and Leah, when they got married, Leah was 22 years old, the Medrash says. And Rachel was also 22 years old. And that's the opinion that they were twins, not sisters. And Leah dies at 44. Yaakov sustains the loss of both of them almost simultaneously. And Yaakov, therefore, is alone for the last 38 years of his life. And Bilhah and Zilpah are the ones that raise the children, the younger children. And that's why we'll find that Yosef is friends with the children of Bilhah and Zilpah, not necessarily with the brothers of Leah, because they're much older than he is, and because Bilhah and Zilpah were, so to speak, his mothers, because his mother died in childbirth, and he was raised by them. So it's difficult, again, to get a clear assessment of the situation. What is interesting to note is that the Jewish people basically are built from Leah. Leah has 7 of the 13 children, 6 boys and 1 girl, Dinah. Leah is the mother of Yehuda, who is the mother of, from whom David HaMelech and the entire dynastic chain of the Messiah arrives. And most Jews that are alive today are from the tribe of Yehuda, some from Binyamin. There's some from every tribe, but the majority of Jews, and we have our name from Yehuda, right? The religion is called Judaism, and we're called Jews because of Judea, because of Yehuda, where we lived. And so Leah is really our mother. Yet the Torah does not tell us anything about her death, whereas the Torah tells us about the passing of Rachel. And Leah is the one who was buried with Yaakov in the Maras HaMachpelah, in the cave of Machpelah, whereas Rachel is buried on the road, at the crossroads of Ephrat, and that's Cave Rachel. But in death, she is joined to Yaakov, whereas Rachel is not. So again, the rabbi said, Leah kol yomeho omdo al parshas drochim. Leah, all of her life, parshas drochim means she stood at the crossroads. She always had choices. Life was not easy for her. Always had uncertainties. And therefore, she is always seen as standing on the road at the crossroads of life. Rachel is always certain of herself. But since Leah overcame the fact that she had so many choices, because after all, she could have been married to Esau. Yeah, and she didn't have to go along with her father's machinations. And because of the fact that she was always, so to speak, tested in life, tested in her marriage, and tested in we'll see later the story of the Dudoim, and all of everything else that's involved here. So therefore the Medrash says that she was privileged to be buried with Yaakov. Whereas Rachel, who had a much simpler life, even though it's also tragic, as we'll discuss next week, none of them have easy lives. Just as any of the Ovos or Imohos, any of our fathers and mothers do not have easy lives. It's a paradigm for the Jewish people that, it never is quite smooth sailing. So Leah is therefore buried with him, and Rachel is not buried with him. Because Leah is seen, so to speak, as overcoming greater tests in life, greater doubts, greater sacrifices. So the Zohar says that just like Leah's life is a mystery to us, so the Torah doesn't tell us about her death either. The only thing that we know is that Yaakov, before his death, tells his children to bring me back to the Moras HaMachpelah, and there to bury me, and there it says, Shoma kavarti es Leah. There did I bury Leah. It's the only reference to the fact that she was no longer alive, or to what happened to her. The Medrash has her praying to God all the time that she should be able to overcome the tests. She should not be overcome by them. The Gemara says that Leah, because of the fact that she suffered, so to speak, the competition of two sisters, two wives, etc., we've seen before with Sarah and Hagar, that very difficult situation, especially now between sisters. So because of that, the Lord, Vayar Elokim Esonya, the Lord saw her affliction, and therefore she becomes fertile, even though she originally, according to the Medrash, is as barren as Rachel was. And we'll see that that's why Rachel complains to Yaakov, because she sensed that Leah was barren, and somehow now look at all the children that she has. So it must be because you prayed for her, you interceded on her behalf, so why don't you do it for me? And Yaakov says it had nothing to do with me. Hatachas Elokimani, what am I, God? It's a matter between you and God, not between me. We'll see how next week when we talk about Rachel, how God, so to speak, takes that. The Gemara says, it's really a medrash in the Bereishis Rabbah. What a lot of the reasons, as we know, for the tension. So he says to her, you were a cheater. All night long I called you Rachel and you answered. And that's not your name. You didn't say, I'm Leah. So the Medrash has her answer to him, I learned that from you. Because your father called you Esau and you said, yeah, Anochi. Right? So, don't raise that issue with me. Well, again, that's not a pleasant way to deal with a husband and wife. But the Medrash purposely says it because the Medrash wants us to understand the problem that existed between them for the 22 years that they were married. And this goes a long way in also explaining the story later of the brothers with Yosef, when mainly it is the children of Leah, Shimon and Levi, that take the lead against him, and Yehuda is the one that takes the lead in Egypt. They're all Leah's children. And to a certain extent, they come to redeem their mother's honor. And there's a piece in the Zohar that says that all later disputes in the Jewish world have their roots in this story. And have the roots in the fact that Yaakov and Leah have a tumultuous relationship. And the Medrash says that because she said that to him, that's why it says, Vayar Hashem kisnu aleya. God saw that somehow she was hated because he resented the fact that she told him off in such a fashion, that she put the blame on him. That she said, you're not the one to, so to speak, tell me what's right and what's wrong. So there are different opinions again as to what about the rest of their marriage. Again, in this mysterious, enigmatic, shrouded way. And again, I have to say, I always mention that we should not think that we're talking about ordinary people. We're not talking about our neighbors here. We're not talking about celebrities. We're not talking about anybody that we know. We're talking about people far, far beyond our imagination. But since the Torah writes the story, and since the Talmud and the Medrash expand on the story, because they want us to learn from it, so therefore we're allowed to talk about it. But otherwise, if the Torah would not have opened the page, and the Talmud and the Medrash would not have continued to turn the pages, we would not have anything to say. So again, the enigma is as follows. There's one opinion that Yaakov wanted to divorce her. But he hesitated. By the time he came back to visit the subject, she had already either given birth or had conceived. And he therefore put that option away. That's one opinion in the Medrash. The other opinion in the Medrash is that he came to love her. And that somehow they got over that hump. And that he treasured her, especially as she was the mother of his children, and of so many of his children. And that he truly came to a relationship of love and of affection towards her. So here we have absolutely two seemingly opposite views of the entire story and the entire relationship. So it could be, I heard from my Rebbe once, that a man can love a woman and still want to divorce her. And that's a possibility. But he always felt the fact that somehow the fact that she had fooled him originally was a great impediment in their marriage. In the Torah, the Torah seems to indicate that she was blessed with children from God because of the fact that she had problems in the marriage. Vayar Hashem kisnu aleya. God saw, so to speak, that Leah is not loved, and therefore vatiftach es rachma, he gave her fertility, And she gave birth to children, because the children, so to speak, become her comfort. They become her reward. And they also become her anchor. Her relationship to Yaakov is anchored in the fact that she is the mother of his children, of 6 of the tribes, and of his daughter. So again, God, so to speak, intervenes. And the Gemara says always that the Lord intervenes always on behalf of those who are persecuted. It's a famous Gemara that the Rabboni Shalom, Elokim Yavakesh Nirdof, is the Pasuk in Koheles. Elokim Yavakesh Nirdof. The Lord seeks out to help the one who is persecuted. So the Gemara says in its inimitable fashion, Afilu Tzadik Rodef Rosha. Even if the one who is doing the persecuting is righteous and right, and the one who is being persecuted is the Rasha, is the one who is evil and wrong, nevertheless, Elokim Yavakesh Nirdaf. God is on the side of the persecuted. We have to remember that. It helps explain a lot of things that happen in our world as well. You can be 100% right, and you have to do it, but you shouldn't think that God somehow lets it pass. He'll give you a free pass because of it. And therefore, Yaakov Avinu, who's the tzaddik, she's not the Rasha, but in this instance, he holds her guilty of the fact that she fooled him. You know, so if we took this story and came to an independent arbiter, or to somebody that, a counselor, and you tell him this story, how she fooled Yaakov, so he 99 out of 100 times they'll say Yaakov is right and she's wrong. Nevertheless, Elokim Yavakesh Nirdaf. Nevertheless, the Lord is on her side. And because of the fact that the Lord is on her side, and she has all these children while Rachel remains barren, and the barrenness of Rachel, again, as we'll discuss, creates its own tension between her and Yaakov. And the Rabboni Shalom, the Medrash says, Lefisha Nisalva Leah, because she felt insulted, she felt persecuted. Nityatro Bebonim. She had many, many children. And again, the Medrash says, She'elu Lechein Oya Magarsha. Because it could be that if it were not for the fact that she had all of these children, and that she was the mother of the Shvatim, had she remained barren, and Rachel would have had the children, he may have divorced her. He may have sent her away. So again, this entire relationship is shrouded in contradictions. The Torah purposely avoids explaining any of it. And the Medrash approaches it from 2 very, very different and distinct angles. The Medrash also says that the children of Leah end up being worshippers of Avodah Zarah. We find the tribe of Ruvain, for instance, says that they don't want to go to Eretz Yisrael. They don't want to go to Israel. Al tavireinu es hayarden. Don't take us across. The tribe of Shimon, which is very small in numbers, so they have they worshipped idols, and the prince of Shimon was the one that lived with the Midianite princess in front of everyone in the Israelite camp. Even Levi, from whom Aaron and the Kohanim and everyone else comes. But later on we find that many of the Kohanim, especially in the second temple, We're tzdokim, we're not loyal to Torah. So the Medrash says that in heaven, every time she gave birth to a child, the angel said, what are you letting this happen for? Don't you see the trouble that's going to come? And God's answer always is, right now she is worthy to have them, and they are worthy to live. And that's the concept that we mentioned by Yishmael, that in heaven they judge the person b'asher hu shom. Heaven does not have preventive medicine, so to speak. Even though God is omniscient and he knows what's going to happen at the end, but that's left to the freedom of choice of individuals. And, God could get rid of all the evil people in advance, right? Hitler didn't have to be born. Ahmadinejad didn't have to be born. We can take care of all of them in advance, which was, so to speak, what the angels say to God, right? Take care of it now. And the Ribono Shel Olam's response always is, we have to leave this freedom of choice to people. And by leaving this freedom of choice, we have to judge people the way they are now. And now she's entitled to have the child. The child's entitled to live, to be one of the tribes of Israel. One of the great points that the Meforshim mention about Leah is that she is the first one that publicly thanks God for what she felt was an extra portion in her life. That's why she called Yehuda, from the word hodo'ah, thanks. She said, Apam odes Hashem, now I will thank God. And that's based on the idea that Yaakov had 4 wives, and they were all aware that there were going to be 12 tribes. So 12 divided by 4, everyone was supposed to have 3. So she had Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now when Yehuda was born, she saw that the Lord gave her an extra share. And that's why she said, Apam odes Hashem. This time, in other words, the first 3 times I don't have to even say thank you because I'm entitled to that. So the Meforshim say that a person should realize that one is not entitled to anything. But especially when one receives something more than what one feels that one was entitled to. All right? You win the raffle. So, I'm not entitled. I don't expect ever to win. So that's Apam odes Hashem. Now I will thank God openly. And that is attributed to Leah as one of her great qualities, that she taught us how to say thank you, which is a basic idea in Judaism. The Torah resents people that are kofui tova. They resent people who aren't able to say thank you, who don't appreciate what they have. And for instance, the whole story of the Meragli, the whole story of the Misonanim in the desert. They said, we don't like the mon. We remember in Egypt we had tomatoes and pickles. It was great. And, and here we don't have anything. That's where God's anger is. What do you mean? Why don't you say thank you? The ability to thank the Ribono Shel Olam for the extra portion, so to speak, which he gives us in life. And from that we have the second story about Leah, is that, so she had 6 sons, and Bilhah had 2 sons, is 8, and Zilpah had 2 sons, is 10. So there's 2 left over. And Leah conceives again. And Leah feels that the child in her womb is going to be a son. And if it's a son, then Rachel will have the least of all of the wives. There'll only be room for 1 left. And therefore, through her intercession, the child becomes a girl. And Dinah is born. And that is held to be an example of Leah's goodness, of her concern for her sister, because of the fact that she wanted that her sister should not be the least of the mothers of Israel, but should also be able to have two of the tribes that Yaakov fathered. And that's why it says, the Gemara says, that's why it says, Ve'achar yolda bas. And afterwards she gave birth to a daughter. After what? So the after, the Gemara says, is after she realized that if it was a son, Rachel would be discriminated against in this fashion, that she would not have at least two tribes. So then the Ribbon Shalom saw to it that it was a daughter. There's an opinion in the Zohar that really Yosef was supposed to come from Leah too. He was supposed to be the seventh son of Leah. Instead, he became the son of Rachel. And that therefore the relationship with the children of Leah is that much more difficult because of the fact that he was like snatched away from them and put into Rachel. The Gemara says, Rashi quotes it, we have the famous incident that of the dudoim, of the flowers, right? And the sisters agree that because of the flowers, Yaakov will be with Leah. And it says, Vateitze Leah. Leah went out to greet Yaakov. So here again we have this double possible interpretation. One interpretation which Rashi takes and the Medrash takes is that Leah was too forward about it. Yatzonis. And therefore it says later in the Torah, by Dina, Vateitze Dina. And Dina also went out, right? And when she went out, so all of a sudden she fell in with Chamor, with the whole story, with Shem, everything that went wrong. So because, you know, they said like mother, like daughter. Yeah, go. What do you mean go out? Stay. Why did you go out? Because it says Vateitze Leo likroso vatomer elai tovo. The other opinion is that her kavona was only l'shem shamayim. She did not look for physical pleasure from this. And she wanted that from her, as happened, she would have more of the tribes of Israel. And therefore, she went out to meet him in order to impress upon him her desire, so to speak, to have another child and to have another tribe amongst the Jewish people. So again, two different views of the same act. One not so positive, and the other one very positive. And we find it even stronger in the Zohar, that she went out again to save Rachel the embarrassment of having to tell Yaakov what the arrangement was between them. Because then Yaakov would feel insulted that, so to speak, he was bartered. And therefore, in order to prevent that, she went out to meet him on the road so that he didn't have to discuss anything with Rachel, and that it would all come from her. And because of that, therefore, the Zohar sees this in a very, very positive light. So here we could say, not a general rule, but I think it's something that should be dwelt upon, at the Zohar and in Kabbalah, Leah is elevated above what the simple interpretation in the Chumash is, and even above what was found in the Talmud and the Medbsh. And she's raised to a much higher spiritual level. And she's held to be a much more holy person. And the Zohar goes out of its way almost to explain every act of hers which could have been interpreted negatively, to explain it in a positive fashion, that she should somehow, that it should reflect upon her glory and compliments, not that it should be something that's negative. In the Chumash itself, and later in the Talmud and in the Midrashim, it's not that clear. But here in the Zohar, it is very clear. And so again, the Torah is understood in many different levels. And on this spiritual level, Leah is judged because perhaps the Zohar sees into the soul of the person, right? Not just into the person's behavior, but sees into the soul and the intent of the person. And the soul and the intent of the person was was to be the great mother of Israel. The Gemara itself says, Vayishka v'imo balayla hu. So it's a strange use of Hebrew. So the Gemara says something which if the Gemara wouldn't say it, no one would dare say it. Kaviyochel, the Gemara says, so to speak, Hoyo b'machshova hu levado yodea. The only one that really knows, meaning God. So God was with her that night. Shalohola al daita lebishvil hamid shvotim. That Leah's sole intent here was to become the mother of the tribes, was to fulfill her mission in life, which was to be the mother of Israel. And therefore, so to speak, the Shekhinah itself, God himself, so to speak, is somehow aware of it, and therefore that's why the Torah uses this strange connection of words to describe the event that occurs. So again, how we interpret it depends which angle we're looking at, how we're looking at Leah, and which and how we want to deal with it. Now, the mystery of Leah is that after all, as I mentioned, most of the Jewish people come from her. She's the mother of most of the Jewish people. And most Jews today, she is our mother. There are a minority of Jews that are from Shevet Binyamin. There are some Jews that are from Shevet Yosef, and some Jews from Yisachar and Zvulun, etc. But the Rov Minyan and the Rov Binyan, the vast majority of the Jews in the world, from the time of the first temple onward, are the children of Leah. And the rabbi saw that a vindication of her. And not only that, we see that she implanted within us what can be called a survival instinct, because Leah is a survivor. She's a survivor of her father's plans. She's a survivor of the problems with Yaakov. She's a survivor of the competition with Rachel. And she is the one that, that at the end, so to speak, triumphs. And therefore, the Jewish people who desperately need a survival instinct, if anything can be said about us, is that we're survivors. The whole thousands of years of our history is a history of survival, of outlasting our enemies, of outweighing the others, of patience. So where did we get that trait from? So the rabbi saw that we got that from our mother Leah. And we see that her children were fiercely loyal to her. The whole story of Reuven, where he interferes with Yaakov after the death of Rachel and the death of Leah. And he interferes with Yaakov as to which tent Yaakov should move into, is based upon loyalty to his mother. So even though the Torah says that that act was incorrect, but it becomes understandable because of the fact that he is defending his mother's station and status, the pride that his mother had, so that in all senses she should not be treated as an inferior wife. And we find that basically the competition between Yosef and his brothers is the competition between Rachel and Leah. And the brothers resent Yosef's heirs. They resent the way he treats them. He treats them as inferiors. He goes to his father and complains about them. He tells them that he dreamt about the sun and the moon and the stars. Everybody's going to bow down to him. They're going to bow down to him. The sheaves in the field are going to bow down to them. And everything comes true. All of his dreams come true, but they resent it. You know, you can have a dream and not tell anybody. You can feel that, that you're better, so to speak, but you don't have to show it. But his blatant behavior towards them, and so in reality, if we think about it, say he's a 17-year-old teenager, and they're grown men, and who cares what he says? But it's deeper than that, because of the fact that in what he says, they sense the same problems of Rachel and Leah again, and they are out to defend themselves as being the children of Leah. So all the Meforshim asks them, why did Yaakov get himself into this mess? Right? Well, he has so many wives and children from all the wives. Everybody knows that there's going to be problems. All right? So again, in Kabbalah, it's the combination of all of them is necessary to make the Jewish people. But Yaakov is almost forced into these things by the circumstances of his life. His brother is out to kill him. He has to flee. His mother sends him to her brother Telavan, to the world's biggest cheater. And in spite of all of his efforts to avoid being cheated, he is cheated. And therefore we have to see a heroism in Yaakov that not only puts up with the situation, but it creates the situation to the best way possible that the Jewish people should be built from it. And Leah, so to speak, is his partner in this. We find later in the book of Ruth that this is repeated. Rashi mentions it, that when Ruth marries Boaz, so Boaz is from the tribe of Yehuda. Boaz was Iv's son, who was the judge at that time, the Shofet, and he is from the tribe of Yehuda. So his blessing is that the Ribbono Shel Olam should have, they said, because it's in Beis Lechem, Yehuda, right? This whole story takes place in Beis Lechem, which was the capital of the tribe of Yehuda. Sometimes Hebron was, sometimes Beit Lechem was. It was one of the main cities of Yehuda. There is no Yerushalayim at that time. I mean, Yerushalayim is a Jebusite fortress. It's not conquered until the time of David HaMelech, 3-4 generations later. So the blessing that they give them is, you see, the Rebbeinu Shalom should bring this woman into your house, Yisimech ki Rachel v'Leah, like Rachel and Leah, asher bonu shtein as Beis Yisrael, that both of them built the house of Israel as we know it. So Rashi already comments that even the tribe of Yehuda mentioned Rachel before Leah, even though they were descended from Leah. So the Meforshim saw in this that somehow this attitude became diffused, so that, and here we're talking hundreds of years later, about 700 years later, after Leah, that it became diffused already. The competition wasn't that strong. But it will wake up again when the kingdoms split, when there becomes Malchus Yehuda and Malchus Yisrael. And the Malchus Yisrael, the Israelite kingdom that splits from the son of King Solomon, from Rechavam, so that's the split of Leah and Rachel again. Yehuda remains Leah, and Malchus Ephraim, it's called, the Shomron, etc., that becomes the kingdom of Rachel. And the kingdom of Rachel is more powerful and greater and more numerous, but it does not survive. And the rabbi said that that was indicated by the fact that he buried her on the road. And he didn't get her, she didn't go to the Maras HaMachpelah with him, whereas Leah did go. And therefore the eternity of Yaakov is reflected in the fact that Leah was buried with him, and that therefore the survival and the eternity of Israel is based upon Leah more than it is on Rachel, even though Rachel is, so to speak, the premier wife in this arrangement. So again, very, very complicated. And the rabbis approached it very gingerly, and I approach it even more gingerly, naturally, as to how to deal with this. With a very, very difficult situation. In Kabbalah, one more thing. In Kabbalah, there's a concept of souls returning, of a reincarnation type of situation. It's not something that's universally accepted amongst Jews. It's certainly not mentioned in the Torah or the Talmud. But in later Jewish thought, it became a notion that found some acceptance. So in the works of the Balei Kabbalah, they always looked to find the reincarnation of Leah. Who represents the reincarnation of Leah? In this field of reincarnation, so to speak, so everybody comes back, even the greatest of the Jews comes back. And then the question is, who is it reflected in, right? So there are many who say that it's reflected in all of the heroic Jewish women that we have. There's an opinion that Dvorah Neviah, the prophetess Dvorah, is Leah in a different form. Because again, she is the one that guarantees the survival of the Jewish people. In Hasidic thought, it's mentioned that Yehudis, who was the heroine of the story of the Hashmonaim, who beheads the Greek general and thereby saves the Jewish people, and that's the origin of our custom to eat dairy foods on Hanukkah, because that's what she gave him to eat. Yeah, and the last blinzer did it to him. I'm talking about Hanukkah. So that's because of the fact of Yehudis. So the thought behind it is that in every generation there are women, so to speak, who are unappreciated, who are not valued as they should be, but who rise to greatness and whose actions become the salvation of the Jewish people. And Leah is the paradigm because of the fact that we would not have expected that she should have a majority of the children. We would have expected that Rachel should have had. We would not have expected that out of her would come Shevet Levi, the Kohanim, the Leviim, Moshe Rabbeinu. We would have thought that that should also come from Rachel. We would have expected that she would not be the paradigm of survival, that most of the Jewish people should be from Leah. And therefore, she represents this idea of the unlikely heroine on whose works and whose life the Jewish people are able to continue and grow and prosper and certainly survive. And that's how she is pictured in the Kabbalistic terms. That's her unique quality. We'll see that Rachel has different unique qualities. But Leah's quality is simply the fact that she sees to it that the Jewish people survive. She sees to it that the children are raised. She sees to it that there are children. Because you can't have a Jewish people without Jews. That's one of the things that, people find hard to figure out. But you can't have a Jewish people without Jews. Jews have to marry, they have to procreate. We need the Jewish people. Then we can discuss what the Jewish people should look like. But there are a lot of people that are worried about what the Jewish people should look like, but they're not involved in making sure that somehow there should be Jews. And we find the reproductive rate amongst Jews in the world is very, very low. In the United States, it's less than 2, which means you don't even reproduce yourself as to what is now. And that takes into account the large Orthodox with all of the families, etc. So Leah stands for all of this. She stands for the fertility of the Jewish people. And we see throughout Jewish history that it goes in spurts. In the beginning of the 19th century, there were about 2.5 million Jews in Europe, and by 1939 there were over 11 million, which is an enormous increase in a relatively short period of time, and under very difficult conditions of Tsarist persecution. And so Leah represents that idea as well, the idea of positive fertility, and the idea that the Jewish people should be built with bodies, with people. I remember the Ponevezherov came to Miami Beach in 1965 when I was 12 years old. And I was the rabbi. And we had a wonderful shul in Miami Beach. It was the perfect makeup. 1/3 were retired people. 1/3 were people that were in business and, and active. And 1/3 were younger people in their 20s just starting out. So he said to me one day, he said, make a meeting in your house. I want to speak to all the young couples. So I thought he wanted money. So I said to him, Rebbe, they're just starting out. They don't have, I'll make from the retired people, we'll make a buck. But, they're not much is going to happen here. They can't, they'll give you $25, but what can they give you? He said, no, he said, you don't understand. Do what I say. So we did. We had a very nice tea in the house, and, about 25 young couples came. He got up and he said, I'm not going to make any speeches. He said, I just want to say 2-3 sentences. He said, there are 1.5 million souls of Jewish children under the age of 12 that were killed in the Holocaust. He said, those souls are floating in the air. Our job is to give them bodies. And he sat down. And that made such an impression. First of all, I don't know who would dare say that, right? Who, tell people that. But he did it. And we did have, thank God, quite a fertility rate in Miami Beach, at least for a while. And so therefore, that's also the symbol of Leah, right? To provide the Jewish people with people, to provide them with children, to provide them with continuity. So in this enigmatic, unclear idea that I have further muddled for you here tonight, there does emerge a certain picture of this great woman, our great mother, of her difficult life, and of her great accomplishments, and of the fact that, literally speaking, most of us, if not all of us, are her children, her descendants. And she is the one who built the house of Israel to the extent as it exists today.